This is the second session we're doing on the spirits of insanity working miracles. And by way of recollection, this is a three-part series. In our first one, we talked about the character of the last days before the coming of Christ. Our second session today is about the woke culture and its battle tactics. We're going to explain how the world is working to get its values across to the public. And there will be a third session about adopting a Bible-based viewpoint. So we saw in our opening session a prophecy from Jesus Christ about the time before the Battle of Armageddon. And we saw in this that there was these spirits of demons or devils working miracles. We looked at the explanation of Revelation 16 and just going over this again. Jesus Christ, who wrote the Revelation through John, said there would be three unclean spirits like frogs that would go into the world. And beginning from the French Revolution, the spirits of frogs went out: liberty, equality, and fraternity, the catch cry of rebellion. Spirits indicates to us not departed souls. It indicates attitudes, mentalities, and policies and values. And Revelation calls them the spirits of demons. In the ancient Greek world, people believed that insanity and many illnesses that had no physical cause were caused by demon possession, which was departed people getting inside your head and turning you insane. So when Jesus talks about the spirits of demons, he's talking about attitudes of madness, and they will work miracles. They will bring sudden, inexplicable changes in society. And all of this is leading up to the Battle of Armageddon, a time when Christ returns to conquer the world and to bring God's judgments upon the wicked of that age. We also saw in 2 Timothy 3, verse 1-3, that Paul the Apostle predicted perilous or dangerous times that would come just before the Lord Jesus Christ would return. And some of these things are very clear to see in our world today. So we're going to now talk about the battle tactics of what is called the woke culture. And that is, of course, the new language, the new values that are now sweeping the world, particularly in Western countries. Identity politics. This is where people adopt a political approach which is very much tied to a gender, a religion, a race, a social background, a social class, or a sexual preference. And they develop political agendas to fight for their cause. And this is part of the angry society. Even though much was achieved in some areas which were very good, such as bringing disability into the limelight. And now we find in the world there are all kinds of disabled Olympic Games, there's provisions for disabled people. Some good things were achieved by humanism. But many of the causes got what they wanted, but haven't stopped there. Now they're actually going on and joining with other causes to actually attack the world and to undermine the values that we've lived with for so many years. Just some examples of that. The Canadian Parliament recently were voting on legislation about people who would not accept trans in schools and other places. And they were bringing in laws to say that to try and deconvert people from wanting to go trans was now become illegal. And the Parliament members of Canada were actually warned that they would be threatened with shaming campaigns if they did not vote in favour of it. And of course, in the end, people feared that so much the vote was unanimous. But it shows you the power of this new woke identity politics. President Biden recently announced he will appoint a black woman to the Supreme Court. Now, you would think that the appointment should be the best candidate for the job. But no, it's got to be a black woman. In other words, identity politics is now reigning supreme. So in these battlegrounds that we've talked about before, we're going to see a lot of angry fights take place as the world around us demands all rights in these particular areas. So here are the emerging battle tactics that we're seeing around us today. Wokespeak. Now, Wokespeak means being in touch with the latest acceptable terms, the issues, values, and causes. So if you're not woke, you're not up to date. So you have to actually see that when the world decides to introduce some new term, some new value, some new idea, you have to adopt it. Otherwise, you are going to be targeted and labelled as being out of touch. So one of the tactics of woke is called catastrophism. So you take your particular cause, your particular issue, and you paint it as an impending disaster, horrific abuse that's going on. You bring out plenty of examples of people who've been affected by it. You have lots of people in tears on Facebook, and you refuse to look at any other perspective on that issue. You don't look at any other priorities about that issue. You just make your issue as bad as you can paint it. And of course, our news media are very expert at this. That's called catastrophism. Then there's labeling. So they've actually developed all these lovely labels they can put on people. Anyone who doesn't agree with their viewpoint, who doesn't fully support their new pushes for equality, is labelled as a racist, as homophobic, misogynist, transphobic, whatever. They've got a label for everybody that doesn't agree with them. And so you'll have a label attached to you, which is very hard to get rid of in social media. And of course, once it's been applied to you, it probably stays with you for life. Then we have a thing called weaponizing. Now, weaponizing is using social media. And what they do is they go and they troll back for past attitudes that no longer fit the modern world. They can destroy your reputation and career by bringing out posts you might have made that were inappropriate to the modern way of thinking. They force powerful people to make grovelling apologies and sorry statements for words they said years ago, despite the fact that when they said them, that was the general public opinion of the time. That was the accepted wisdom of the time. But now, if you want to survive in the modern world, you have to make grovelling apologies and sorry statements. And our parliaments in Australia are always making sorry statements to somebody. Then you have the victim culture. People are made into victims by the media broadcasting their complaints, and everyone becomes the victim. And we've had, of course, the Me Too movements, where everyone is to blame, especially the government, for not actually correcting all these wrongs in the past. And everyone is a victim, and they demand compensation and sympathy, and they want their cause advanced. Then we have a strange thing called intersectionality. And a lot of these particular causes and fights that are going on, and the identity politics, actually join together. And so you get a whole raft of oppressed groups come together in the demands that are made upon governments. And I'm going to give you a classic example of this at the World Climate Conference. We actually find that some of the woke weapons are insulting in their generalisation. So the feminists talk about white supremacist males, male patriarchy, mansplaining, which is a very Australian term, where any man who gets up and tries to explain himself is actually labelled as mansplaining. So he's not talking to the women, he's talking about how men would explain things. So these are insulting generalisations. In the public service, in academia and companies, the recruiting policies have been changed to actually look for disruptors over conservatives. So they want people who will challenge anyone who has any existing values, and if they don't change quickly, they'll be subjected to unconscious bias training. And it's not just about promoting the best interests of the business, it's about making sure that if you're in that company or public service, that you actually reflect the current thinking of society. As a result, they use government and media regulators to exclude and silence any contrary opinion. So they will make complaints, they'll get people arrested for hate speech, they will have people charged for breaches of what they think has happened. And of course, it ties up people with court cases and having to defend themselves against these new opinions. What is incredible about the new woke language is it ignores reason, it ignores history, and it ignores biology. It's intent on stifling free speech and rational debate by attacking the individual. So you can't reason with a lot of these people. You can't go back and say, let's look down and look at the biology of this situation. Let's go down and sit at reason, whether it's right or wrong, whether it's good for society, whether it's good for the country. No, anyone who opposes them is attacked and destroyed. And what they do is they create their own language to confuse the facts. They can bring in dishonest arguments under the guise of complexity, and they have developed their whole new range of language. I'm now going to put up an example of just one paragraph from a postmodernist, and you tell me if you can understand it. And I can't even read some of these words. But this is a classic example of leftist gobbledygook. The move from a structuralist account in which capital is understood to structure social relations in relatively homologous ways to a view of hegemony, in which power relations are subject to repetition, convergence, and the rearticulation brought the question of temporality into the thinking of the structure. and marked a shift from a form of Althusserian theory that takes structural tonalities as theoretical objects to one in which the insights into the contingent possibility of structure inaugurate a renewed conception of hegemony is bound up with the contingent sites and strategies of the rearticulation of power. Now, I defy anyone without a dictionary to actually make any sense of that. But you see, this is put out, it looks very informed, it looks very highbrow, and people think they must know what they're talking about. Well, actually, it's just leftist gobbledygook. Let's talk about identity politics. This is a cut from a very recent paper in Australia where they've just appointed a new director of the Sydney's Museum of Contemporary Art. And she started off her tenure by saying that she has some news for white male artists. You're not just that interesting. She went on to say this, that our museums and galleries worldwide are grappling with the imbalance of artists in their exhibitions. Surprise, surprise. You go and look at the artists, look at the great musicians, they are incredibly dominated by males. And she says our galleries have been skewed to a particular demographic. In other words, it's almost like this was a deliberate thing, that men would be the majority of artists and painters and musicians of the past. So she says, today, if you're a white male, you're not so interesting. It doesn't mean you're not a great artist. I think it's more that this isn't relevant for people now. So they're going to make a lot of selections based upon identity politics, not upon the quality of the art. And it just shows you again the spirit of insanity working miracles. Here's the example of intersectionality. This climate summit that Joe Biden called, a 15-year-old activist from Mexico started lecturing the world's leaders and the presidents, including Putin and the president of China, who were listening in on this conference. I want you to notice what she said, what she demanded. And this is, intersectionality is bundling all the woke causes into one battle. So at a climate conference, she said, we demand comprehensive, non-Eurocentric and intersectional climate education, including literacy on climate justice, environmental racism, ancestral and indigenous wisdom, disability justice, green careers, and sustainable living. And you can see that Mr. Putin would have been terrified by this 15-year-old because she's demanding all these things he couldn't deliver. But it just gives you some idea of how they think that these voices from people that really haven't had much life, haven't had a lot of education, people who really can't control the world's problems, actually think they can demand all these things and put them all into one battle, but they do. So these weapons. Let's just talk a little bit about the madness of the left. The left, which of course is where most of this Black Lives Matter and all of these particular causes are located. Not saying the right doesn't have their extremists, they certainly do. But the left, which is pushing the woke culture, they say that they're all about tolerance. But the one thing they can't intolerate is people who are intolerant. So they actually refuse to accept people that have a different viewpoint. And particularly on matters of sexuality, they just will not accept anyone not accepting their viewpoint. So reason and rational facts no longer count. They don't believe in the collective good sense of the people anymore because they say that can't be trusted, and they might not be so wrong about that. But once we, of course, society made decisions about who would rule, and the opinion of society mattered when it came to the legislation that governments passed. But the radical left believes that society can't make those decisions anymore. They are the outrage industry. They won't debate on facts. It's all about you conform or be cancelled. Some recent cancellations that occurred in the last couple of years, Germaine Greer, who of course was one of the pioneers of the freedom movement for women, she was cancelled. Richard Dawkins, who attacked religion and got rid of God in his books, he became unacceptable to the woke movement. Benedict Cumberbatch, the actor, had to make a grovelling apology. And Rowan Atkinson and many others have been cancelled out as being people that you want to listen to. Incredibly, J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series, was not allowed to attend the recent 30-year celebration because she has views that don't fit with the woke culture of today. So the author of all those books, which led to all the movies, was not allowed to attend the 30-year celebration. And it just shows you how people can be cancelled if they don't accept the madness of the left. So the left believes hate speech is not free speech. And I want you to notice this comment. This comes from the red and black anarchists, which of course tells you something about the spirit of these people. Every time hate speech is permitted, and by hate speech they mean Bible viewpoints, moral viewpoints, it costs someone part of his or her self, part of their self-respect or part of their sanity. It rips people to shreds. You see the catastrophism there? People are ripped to shreds and society is destroyed. That's the catastrophism of the language of the angry left. It's to them a terrible sin that somebody has their feelings hurt or their self-respect hurt by facts. So the Bible said they would be despisers of those that are good. And this anger that is expressed against those who will not agree with the woke culture is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And in the last days, there would be despisers of those that are good. So people have gone down this spiral of cancel culture and the idea that everything is offensive. And so you'll find that the woke culture people use terms like, with your views, I don't feel safe. With your views, I am offended. With your views, you're taking something away from me. And it all gets back to what I think and what I feel. Let's give you some examples. Again, the cartoons out there in the world are very perceptive. Here is the cancel culture guillotine at work. The Cat in the Hat, of course, was banned. Mr. Ed was banned. Abraham Lincoln was banned. So many things that have been part of our life and part of our literature are no longer allowed. And the woke people say we're going to need a bigger basket. So they're cutting off heads as fast as they can go. This is a great cartoon, but it talks about a future game show called Facts Don't Matter. And the presenter says, sorry, Arthur, your answer was actually correct, but Paul shouted his opinion louder, so he's part of the angry society. He gets the point, and as an extra bonus point goes to Sue, as she was offended by your answer. And that says it all, doesn't it? It's how loud you shout or how much you're offended means you get rewarded by the woke society, because facts don't matter anymore. Here's the cancel culture at work. Here's a couple of people floating up in the clouds. We no longer obey the law of gravity. Why? Well, they say that Newton once offended a neighbour who was cross-eyed. And so, they've now refused to accept the law of gravity. So it just gives you an example. Even the world can laugh at themselves how crazy this is. Sorry statements for beliefs once widely held. The historical crimes against wokeness. So they go back and they find out something you wrote or said years ago now is unacceptable and you have to suffer for it. So this guy's been brought before the court for confessing to a crime that back in the 1960s, he actually liked the black and white minstrel show, which of course is language that is no longer acceptable in the woke culture. You can't have black and white being mentioned in those connections to each other. So grovelling apologies have to be made. So people give up on their principles, they give up on their beliefs. If they want to remain relevant, they want to remain accepted in this modern society, they have to go and make grovelling apologies to the woke culture. And as it says there in the cartoon, in doing so, they surrender their spine. They give up on their beliefs, their principles, and all the things they once stood for to try and remain relevant to society. Now, here's an example from an Australian paper last weekend. This lady was appointed to be the head of the Girl Guides in Western Australia. She was terminated a very short time later because after she got the job, she posted on Facebook, I'm now CEO of Girl Guides, Western Australia. I've noticed this constitution panders to the ideology of trans. Can I message you to find the legal standing on this? If we change back to biological female, are we breaking the law? So when she came into the job, she suddenly discovered that the policy of the Girl Guides in Australia was that people who chose to be trans, that is boys who wanted to become girls, could join the Girl Guides and fully participate. And here's what their legislation says. An individual is to be considered the final authority on their own gender identity. The transgender girl, that is a boy who now wants to be a girl, will participate in the same activities, including sleeping in the same area as other youth members. So if a 15-year-old boy decides that he wants to be a girl and join the Girl Guides, he can then sleep in the same tent as 12-year-old girls on camping excursions. Incredibly though, if a biological girl transitions to become a boy, she can't attend Girl Guides. So if a girl says, I actually want to be a boy today, She's got to leave the Girl Guides and go and join the Scouts. This is just how crazy this woke biology is, because, you know, biologically speaking, it's generally very clear whether someone is a boy or a girl. What you end up with is the incredible situation that a trans male can sleep in the same tent as girls, but a trans girl can't. She has to go and get into a tent with boys. And it just shows you that the woke society has created enormous problems for itself by saying that we have to accept people's choice to change their gender. Well, here's an example of cancel culture. Margaret Court was the world's most successful winner of Grand Slams through the 60s and 70s in tennis. In Australia, the Melbourne Arena is named after Margaret Court. But now she's vilified and hatred because she has actually gone public with her Bible-based views on sexuality. And all she says was, this is what the Bible says. The Premier of Victoria, where her arena exists, wants the arena to be renamed, to get rid of her, to cancel her out. She's hated for her Bible-based views. So the Premier slams her views and the fact that she got Australia Day honours for her tennis victories. And this is where, again, we see the cancel culture coming into being. On the same day that Margaret Court was given the Australia Day honours, a long-standing journalist who retired from the ABC was also given honours, but he refused them on the basis he wouldn't be on the same list as Margaret Court. So again, trying to cancel her out, he actually cancelled himself. She got her honours. The arena is still named after her because of her tennis prowess, but she has been vilified by the Premier of that state because of her Bible-based views. That's the cancel culture at work. So we need to understand, don't we, that this is a world gone crazy. The Bible has a lot to say about being different to the world in which we live. Because the world is ruled by people who are generally not given to Bible principles, who don't follow the principles of Christ, we have a world that is very largely going down the path of what men want to be. In Ephesians 4, verse 17 and 18, and this is Weymouth's translation, the Apostle Paul said this, "Therefore I warn you, I implore you in the name of the Master, no longer live as the Gentiles in their perverseness live, with darkened understandings, having by reason of the ignorance which is deep-seated in them, and the insensibility of their moral nature, no share in the life which God gives." If we want to share in the life which God offers through his Bible, we have to be aware that we're going to be very different to the world in which we live. And we may have to adopt positions and values very different to that which the world has. Thank you for listening to this second presentation